All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the BC Links to Learning webinar. We have our amazing guest speakers. They're back, they're here packed with knowledge, with wisdom, with their life and professional work experiences. So Laara and Mark Salter, we're really happy that you are joining us. Today's topic is decolonizing and establishing effective development corporations. So really good presentation this afternoon. Before we get started, let's just take a moment. Let's press pause and give thanks to Creator. So whether hopefully you're close to a window that you can look outside and just take a moment and take in the view. We give thanks for the gift of another day, Creator. We give thanks for this beautiful land, Mother Earth, Grandfather Sky, the sacred waters, the medicines that provide us, that help us to walk in a good way. We give thanks for all that you have given to us. We give thanks for our relatives, our friends, our families, but also the relatives that are the winged ones, the swimmers, the four-legged, all the animals, and the plants. We give thanks for all that's included in the circle of life. Help us to walk a good path. Help us to honor you, to honor our ancestors, to honor ourselves, and to honor this circle. So we give thanks for the gift of knowledge and sharing and this moment. Hi. So we're honored to have two amazing presenters, Laara Yaghujaanas and Mark Salter. Laara, she owns and operates Cardin Consulting, which she established in 1997. And 10 years later, Mark came into the picture, joined Cardin Consulting, and they have been life partners and business partners ever since. They're a really good partnership, a dynamic duo who's coming to present what they know, what they have experienced. They've had much experience with working with different nations. Laara holds a master's degree from Royal Roads University and was awarded Royal Roads University Founders Award. There's so much knowledge that she has, so much education behind her belt. And Mark has worked with nations to achieve their goals of developing successful intergovernmental partnerships and has worked with First Nations in Ontario, gained more than 10 years experience working with and for First Nations. He has a deep level of respect for First Nation and possesses a wide variety of skills that helped him to develop intergovernmental partnerships. So these two are offering their words of wisdom and knowledge, and we are just so honored that you're with us again. Welcome, Laara and Mark.
Thank you so much. That's Haida for thank you, good people, for being here today. I'm honored to be here. My name again is Laara Yaghujaanas. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. As was said earlier, we've been doing this for quite a while. For myself, it's been 25 years, and we're honored to share with you today those tips and tricks that are going to help you to establish an effective development corporation from an indigenous worldview that can help support your nation's economic development.
I'm greeting you in Lekwungen, the indigenous language of the Lekwungen people of Southern Vancouver Island, where I was born and raised. And we're broadcasting to you from the North Shore Studios on Tsleil-Waututh territory. We live amongst and recreate amongst the Tsleil-Waututh here on the North Shore of Burrard Inlet, and also give thanks and hosting to the unceded territories of the Squamish and the Musqueam nations in and around the lower mainland area.
So today we're going to take a look at a few different things, again, looking specifically about those approaches, first how we approach the work, but also all the component parts that we've seen help contribute to effective development corporations based upon an indigenous worldview. Then we're going to have a little bit of time for questions and answers, and then we'll wrap up the session for today. There will be a recorded session on the Canoe website, as well as a copy of this PowerPoint. So again, acknowledging that we are coming to you from the territories of the Tsleil-Waututh and overlapping territories of the Squamish and Musqueam people. Our contact information is included here, but it's also included at the very end. If you have any questions for us directly, if you'd like to reach out, we're happy to be of service. And as we start today, again, we want to talk about our approach, and our approach is, again, looking at things from an Indigenous worldview. So having read quite a number of documents and researched and studied and developed many training materials for Indigenous governance, decolonizing is something that I really feel is really around the idea, rather than a decolonizing and taking away, it's really taking a look at a strengths-based approach of how can we be self-determined, considering our strengths and our ability to move forward based on our traditional knowledge and customary laws. So when we take a look at decolonizing, we define it as a critical, thoughtful reflection of our own perceptions and understandings and the worldview of who we are. It's about questioning ourselves and the world around us and informing ourselves on how Canadian colonial systems have come into place in the last 150 years. So looking through that at the systems that are in place and getting informed about those things. This includes considering how we were as a people prior to colonization, what worked well to help us not just survive, because I don't buy that bare sustenance was how we lived, or else we wouldn't be here for 15,000 years. I believe we thrived and we had healthy, rich communities. And when we take a look at that over the last 15,000 years, what are those strengths that we can draw upon, that knowledge and that understanding that can help us to succeed for the coming years? And then to reframe, after we've taken a look at all of those things, how those Indigenous ways of knowing and being that you want to be in the world, that I want to be in the world, and to co-create a better world based upon that knowledge and wisdom for our people today and for future generations, and then be that change every day. So with that approach, what we're going to take a look at again is some things that you need to, again, look at the system around you. In particular, when we establish development corporations, the legal system that we're working within.
The concept of shareholder primacy. The vast majority of contemporary lawyers that are hired to assist with setting up of First Nations DevCorps are not Indigenous and have little experience with First Nations and setting up a First Nations development corporation, or have an understanding of the history of the shareholder primacy in reference to Brett Watcher. As a result of this failed premise, most of First Nations development corporations are established utilizing a Western legal off-the-shelf template that is built around the idea of shareholder primacy. That Western template for standard corporations establishes boards accountability only to the shareholders. That's known as the shareholder primacy, their first prime, and was invented and it came into concept in 1932 and the end of the Great Depression as a way to encourage private sector involvement to take more risks, be focused primarily on shareholder value, in case money, and gave wealthy shareholders historic levels of power. And remove this responsibility of corporations to their local communities, because before that, they often built the communities. This decision coincided with greater deregulation by other governments. And this limits the type of systems that we are playing out globally and at a cost to our environments, people, and our future. And so we're looking to rethink how this shareholder or how a corporation should work and benefit our people's communities.
So with that knowledge, you aren't stuck going to a lawyer and just having them tell you how the world is going to be, or your development corporations are going to be. You can now question and say, based on our understanding of the legal system, we want to have articles and shareholder agreements and business charters that reflect an understanding that this is a community-owned development corporation. So when we take a look at that, we're going to tell you those key considerations in addition to having those types of agreements that need to be considered in making sure that you are accountable and that those resources owned by community, held in trust by the shareholders, do have that type of collaborative planning and reporting and accountability back to community that is ideally the model as a collectivist-based values people that we have in our development corporations as well. So our Indigenous way of establishing development corporations. So when we take a look at that worldview and making sure that we have that critical analysis, again, not only of the legal system, but everything that you're planning, how did this system come into being? Why are we using this? Question. And then look at what were our ways of doing things. What was the wisdom in that? Why did we do those things? There is depth, huge depth of wisdom in the simplest of our protocols and laws that can inform who we are today. So thinking about that and being able to focus on those responsibilities of leaders is what we're going to work through in this workshop today, particularly shareholders.
Establishing effective diverse nations community-owned development corporations. First Nations DevCors need, it requires that leaders, councils, and shareholders do the important work of articulating the culture and needs and interests of their nation, and is recommended that they include the DevCors values aligned with those of the nation, principles and mandate the purpose of what you're doing, and the mission. Create performance measures and limits, and select and create a competency matrix so you can recruit board members that will move your DevCor forward with your values in mind. Shareholder and board members' roles and responsibilities, defining those up front, really important so you get the idea of where everyone's responsibilities are and what you're going to do. Corporate governance policies, the framework, the review, including issue resolution, how to deal with problems before you have a problem. Be strategic, learn how to do strategic planning. That must be part of the governance plan. And reporting, and to remain accountable to ultimately the citizens of your nation. And in order to enhance that, we suggest a community advisory to build awareness, enhance business capacity and economic diversification in your community, and the understanding of how a corporation or business works. Ensure effectiveness through development and sharing of aligned opportunities that are responsive to the community's needs and interests, and support good corporate governance. So if your whole community is sort of a tourist-related community, going in the route of a mining operation may not fit with the values and the goals of your nation's members. Agreements to support these strategic mandates from leadership, so things like shareholders agreements, business charters, and repayment plans, which we're going to talk about later, about maintain your responsibility to your community members.
So quite often you'll see lawyers come in and they'll say, okay, we'll help set up a development corporation. They come with a canned, off-the-shelf articles of incorporation. They'll come up with the canned presentation, and then they just say, okay, shareholders, define a couple things for us and then sign here. And that's all you have to do as a shareholder. They don't go through this type of planning that's required. So again, we're trying to support that and your ability to influence these areas that we've seen in our experience over the years, where we've seen development corporations either set up without, or for the vast majority, set up without this type of understanding, or a limited understanding and not having these things in writing. So what we always start out with is the values and principles, most importantly, your values. And values, and I get very specific about this because I'm a CCT level 2 certified values consultant. And that means that I spent a lot of time looking at what that means internationally, nationally, and within organizations. And what we found is that values are anything that's most important to you. It is those things that we're raised within our families, our extended families, our communities, that allow us to understand and paint our picture of the world of what's important to us and how we behave in the world based on those values. And our indigenous worldview is based on a different set of values than those of the mainstream. That is to say that our indigenous worldview and our values is collectivist, meaning that we're concerned about primarily the interests of all of us as an interdependent community. Even if we're away from each other, we still consider that as a part of our community. Where in the Western US model, they're more individualistic, and their priority is around themselves and their immediate family, and that's it. They don't consider the context of impacts or considerations in planning for anyone outside of that little tiny sphere. So when we take a look at our values, as we live those values, as we start to grow up with those values, we get informed by principles. What are those things that are the rights and wrongs of what we do that inform our actions? And those actions then lend themselves to becoming our embedded knowledge and wisdom, our ways of knowing and being, that then are further reinforced through our values and our behavior and those principles that correct behavior on a regular basis. So it's really important that if we take those values, they must become the foundation of our development corporation so that they can have that similar behavior and understanding of our worldview applied in business development. When we do that, it gives us a very strong foundation. And what we found out in research from Coos and Posner is that there are very, very significant benefits to doing that.
Values council of the 21st century. Too often, values are perceived as inconsequential to governing or operating an organization. However, in our 21st century, leaders around the world are realizing that organizations with a strong culture based on shared values consistently outperform other organizations by a huge margin, in as much as 4 times faster when it comes to revenue growth. Rates of job creation, which is really vital, is often 7 times faster. And of course, the value of their corporation grows at an exponential rate, often is showing an excess of 12%. Profit performance moves up because your ability to be effective is improved, and so your performance rates go up. That's really important. First Nations organizations are unique in Canada that these differing values must be the foundation of our organizations if they're to be effective. We have some examples, but we'll go into those later.
So this is a tool, this table is what we normally share, just because when we do our work in the field, and again, that's most of what we do, is working with community, doing this corporate governance planning work, as well as the governance policies and nations governance policies. We go into the field and we work with people to create a whole policy set based on their culture. So one of the first things we ask is, what are those things that are most important to you as a nation? And we usually go round table and ask people, and we start to hear these common threads, and quite often we hear language coming up which we love. And we'll hear those things that allow us to then define what the values are in black and white for them that are the most important things. And it's a very exciting time because people get so excited about the work we're doing with them because they've never had a chance to sit down and articulate their values in a meaningful way. And that's how we base all of our work. So using this tool just to say, what are the values, have that conversation and write down what it means allows you to then do a significant amount of values aligned work that is really, really powerful. So really important to talk about our worldview and our values. These principles are just some examples that we normally consider and recommend for consideration when we develop principles for development corporations. And they're just a reflection of some of the conversations you could have. Quite often, again, most of what we do have derived from our communities are ones that cover most of this, but they are ones that should consider, one, living according to your values and behaving according to your values, making sure you have engaged citizens so that even if you're doing a development corporation planning, reporting, business opportunities, it should include community. Effective business growth, development, and management, the core purpose by which an organization like this is developed, which includes sound financial management, which may have a different way of looking at it. And of course, accountability. So those are some of the ones that just could be considered for principles that can define some of the rights and wrongs of how behavior and values can be expressed.
When we see language included at this stage in the development of the corporation's direction, we see inclusion then, because then the language reflects the values of your community and its growth. And having that reflected in your corporation empowers your community members to be a part of it. The purpose and mandate statement, which is the third phase, using words such as purpose or the intent, is to focus attention on the statement, the principal controlling idea for your DevCorp. Focus on why the DevCorp is being established or the intended outcomes, which many of our First Nation clients have stated, these are the obvious ones that we like to share with you. Creating consistent, sustainable financial benefits that ensure the DevCorp is sustainable and reinvestment back into the nation. Opportunities for skills training and employment and contracting opportunities for nation citizens. We'll talk more about that. Sustainable development, management and protection of your territory for today and for the future. No point in going down a development corporation idea that will limit your opportunities in the future. That may not be consistent with your nation's values. Developing hard and soft infrastructure is part of your development corporation's work plan. So if it's to be a call center, as we've often seen, there's the road into the call center, and then there's the supportive broadband that comes into it as well. Those are things that when the call center leaves are still going to be there. So those are good choices to leave and rebuild your community. And that support and cultural revitalization is the inclusion of language and customary laws and practices into the development corporation's DNA. Protecting and using the nation's intellectual property, traditional knowledge and customary laws and protocols are particularly important if you're going to be in a tourism-focused DevCorp. We can talk about that in some detail, but that's one of the responsibilities you have to acknowledge. Nations, citizens' capacity development, the understanding and training and employment opportunity and contracting through small business development is to help diversify our economy and be self-sufficient. Important because those opportunities for engagement with your community members through advisory committees and so forth, training opportunities that were listed earlier, and then the ability that if someone in your community can do part of what you need to do for your development corporation's goals, they should be given an opportunity to be able to bid.
So, and those might not be too obvious. When we actually go into a community and do this work, it's usually a 1 or 2 day planning session, usually 2, I should say. And we do work through the entire scope of this to help to redefine the development corporation. Those are the consistent ones we see being risen as topic ideas around intended outcomes and the purpose of the development corporation. So we wanted to share that to give you some seeds to help establish your own development corporations. So the next piece is taking a look at the purpose and mandate. So again, defining what that looks like. So a purpose or intent, again, has to be considered as outlining in your articles of incorporation what its intended function is. That includes establishing, for many of our nations, wealth creation, which was created by Member 2 and other First Nations who've taken a look at the broader scope of outcomes that they'd like to see or the intended benefits that are arising from their development corporations. And when we talk about First Nations wealth creation, it usually is, again, very broad, including quality of life, material well-being, sustainability of well-being, which we have a definition in here for, that's much broader than just financial. A purpose and mandate should also refer to the primary methods, for example, business development or creating a diverse economic foundation, however you'd like to describe the purpose and function of your development corporation. And should always refer to the constituents that it's intended to benefit. So ideally you'd have something like the Canoe Development Corporation is intended to improve or to create wealth for the benefit of Canoe members and future generations. So taking a look at in that broad application, purpose statement would say something like that. Ideally, if you can create that purpose statement again in your own language, Mark was saying this at an earlier workshop, that the whole idea is that not only to have that relevance and have the culture reflected, but also that depth and knowledge of wisdom that's embedded in your language that will resonate with your members too. So when they hear it in their own language, they will more own and more adopt and be involved in the economic development activity of your nation.
Performance measures, if we suggest inclusion in the articles of incorporation. Performance measures are a tool that is used to demonstrate progress. Good performance measures are not subjective and typically focus on clear objective measures that explicitly define the benefits, units of measure, collections of frequency, data quality, expected outcomes, targets, and are verifiable through numbers, percentages, or dollars. These are the most effective First Nation governments are the outcomes focused versus inputs, process outcomes, or project-based measures. Good performance measures allow measurement of accomplishments, not just of the work that has been performed. Focus employee attention on what matters most to success, supporting transparency and accountability, and good governance, including mitigating micromanaging. Every measure is part of a chain of cause and effect that has a link to the realization of this objective. As such, it is important to critically reflect on what the agreed upon measure will be to ensure that outcome is consistent with the intent. And so what measures matters. What you decide to measure really is a point of focus. We use a canoe analogy. We load our canoe, we get our paddlers in there, and off we go. We're leaving our destination. We have to arrive by nightfall, and we have a couple of milestones to get along the way. We need to be at a certain point of land by midday when the tide changes. So that's our focus as a team going into the canoe and going to this destination. I'm not, as the helm, worried about the stroke style or the number of strokes per minute for each side. That's the responsibility of the person who's doing that job. We've all agreed on the goal, and we're all going to achieve that goal. We're going to measure our success, making sure that we get to that point of land by midday. That's the way we want to move forward as a way of quantifying our performance.
So Mark was just saying that that performance measure is really important in terms of avoiding micromanaging. So when we talk about leadership, the job of leadership at the shareholder or the board level is at the strategic level, meaning that there should be this definition and setting of a strategic foundation that there's all the component parts we're talking about today that leadership must undertake in planning. But it also leaves room for shareholders and board members to get into areas because of their authority and power position within a development corporation to potentially micromanage. And we want to avoid that at all costs. So we really enjoy performance measures because it is a control measure. So when we want to control performance, having that discussion to articulate what is the agreed upon performance measure, a realistic, achievable performance measure, leadership can now come back to control everything that it must, not everything it can, to have those strategic conversations around, did we realize our performance indicators for return on investment, the number of jobs and contract opportunities we expected to realize this year? When those conversations are had at a strategic level with operations, you can support and celebrate that performance without potentially risking micromanaging. So it's a great strategic conversation focus for leaders that we always try to encourage. So in addition to those conversations around the policies and procedures that establish the organization's capacity, those conversations around controlling performance are around those performance measures that have to be collaboratively developed and agreed upon and then monitored on a regular basis. This little diagram just gives you a little example of a strategic plan or a business plan that will articulate goals and objectives, tasks and activities, agreed upon performance measures, dates and resourcing and reporting and accountability. So when we take those performance measures, that should be directly what's provided to community and shareholders in the form of quarterly and annual reporting, which again allows for people to focus on the intended outcomes and avoid conversations that can interfere with effective operations. So really we're having performance measures be the conversation point for not only leadership, but also try to focus on that on community based upon their needs and interests and realizing those objectives at the end of the day that the community's identified.
Those performance measures are examples we've given. We've showed our canoe analogy. We're creating consistent, sustainable financial benefits to ensure the DevCore's sustainability and reinvestment back into the nation is a measure you can put together. Skills and training opportunities we talked about, supporting cultural revitalization is part we've talked about. Citizen capacity building, people being involved in your DevCore, and you can see if you can analyze and you can quantify their involvement.
So if we take the intended outcomes that we just talked about that inform this, we just want to give you some examples of what those dollars, numbers, percentage figures could look like by taking those directly across to say, now how do we measure it? So the clear one is obviously money, return on investment. That's an easy one, a dollar sign, we all know that one. But supporting management and training and contracting, how many per year? How many are we getting from our business operations if we're making that a part of our partnership agreements and our impact benefit agreements and other agreements that we're establishing with partners? How many are we actually realizing? Including important measures that if you don't realize them in your contracted agreements, to have financial ramifications and or incentives, but also to be able to have outcomes that if they aren't realized, that there's an equivalent dollar value that the partner pays as a penalty for not having realized that. So those types of things that allow you to be able to meaningfully realize the intended outcomes that your communities asked for.
And then developing your board. You need a competency matrix to select and promote your board's application. A competency matrix is a broad set of characteristics for a team that's intended to guide recruitment and support a DevCore to realize its purpose. Typically, this includes a holistic set of skills that the team should possess, including financial management skills, either through experience or training, corporate law skills, understand a legal contract, business skills, either having been in a business or having been trained to run a business, and First Nations understanding, and especially in a First Nations DevCore experience. So having someone who's done this before, knows what the responsibilities are, an important part of your board makeup. And business experience as it relates to nation's industry priorities. Again, if you're going to be focused on the tourism industry, have someone who's actually had some experience successfully in the tourism industry to assist your DevCore as a board member. Leadership in establishing and reestablishing DevCore should define exactly what this matrix should look like for their nation. So it's going to mix things up. The process by which the board is recruited is ideally through a broad call. If it's a public acknowledgement, we're looking for board members, please apply. However, if our First Nation representatives are preferred The process should still strive to ensure that those on the board with whom they appoint with authority have the skills needed for the DevCorps to be successful and to realize the current and future generations' benefit. And the rules of how many nation citizens can and should be involved should be maximized only if they have the skills to do this important work and not at the cost of fulfilling the DevCorps' purpose. We have a very good analogy for that.
I'm actually going to mix it up. The analogy I'd like to use is the canoe.
Okay.
So if we're taking a canoe and we want to say that we're going to use this as a vehicle for the nation to achieve its economic goals and interests, we're going to ask for a team of people that are involved that have those competencies. So if you want people to come in, you're going to need people who know how to paddle. You're going to need to know that you have a helmsman at the back that knows how to guide and navigate. You're going to need to know someone who knows how to read the waters and the tides and know that specific area of waters that you're moving through so you don't go under. And you're going to need to specifically know that someone who's gone that route before can help guide you so that they can avoid those pitfalls and help get you through. So using that analogy, whenever you set out in undertaking a business venture, you should always have those basic components: how to manage money, how does this apply to law, so we can understand contracts and agreements, those types of business thinking skills and capacities. It doesn't mean you have to have an MBA, but some basic fundamentals. And of course, those understandings as it relates to the business priorities that your nation has an opportunity to realize. So again, as Mark was saying, if you have someone involved in the tourism industry at the board level, and you're involved in the tourism industry, you've got a really well-informed voice and that expertise that can contribute to being successful in that industry. But if you do the opposite and you set out a canoe with no one who's paddled, no one knows where they're going, you just have someone from each community there, but no one knows how to do anything, your canoe's not going to do anything but be a nice little seat on the water. It's not going to do anything. So when we set out that canoe, it has to have the right people in the canoe so you can move forward effectively and get to your goals.
I like that analogy. I'm going to want to use that myself. The shareholders and boards roles and responsibilities. Development corporate shareholders and board roles and responsibilities and limits. Important to get these defined early. And
we have this slide, and in the interest of time, I just want to expedite this one. It's really, we know the board's roles and responsibilities quite well. What we always find though is lawyers don't explain the roles and responsibilities that the shareholders should have. And in particular, in our experience, all of the things we're talking about today is that the shareholder should sit at the table with a competent consultant and or planner to be able to work through and develop. And don't expect your lawyer to have these competencies. They couldn't care less. They'll take a numbered article incorporation off the shelf and then write it up for you. They're not going to care about these details, but you're going to have to live with this. So you need to have people who can help support articulating and planning all of these various areas for your development corporation to operate effectively. And that includes everything we're talking about today, including defining that strategic direction and monitoring that strategic direction. That's the job of shareholders. And if they feel the board's not doing their job, the other responsibility they have is to pull that board. So the shareholders have a lot of responsibilities that no one talks about to do this well, including, again, setting the direction and pulling the board if they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And so we've got a little diagram on the right that talks about that delegated responsibility from citizens to shareholders to the board to the CEO and operations, and then that accountability back up.
Good corporate governance is the process of making your government and your organization be successful. You have an initial process. Someone has to do something more than once, becomes a repeatable process. You start developing some standards and some policies around doing things. And as you do that more often, you're going to segment them into different departments: housing, business development, these different categories. So you'll have them structured. Then you'll have a process by which you're going to adhere to making sure that you maintain that process. And then you're going to then mature into what's known as a learning organization. You're going to continually look to improve yourself. These are the things you'll have to have in place as part of operating your DevCorps.
And this is what we call organizational capacity. So when we look at those nations that have done really well, they have developed policies at every single level. So for a Soyuz Indian band, when they developed their Spirit Ridge Hotel, They made sure they had policies for every single aspect of hotel operations, and they have a binder this thick that informs on how everything should happen. So if anyone ever has a problem or is unclear, they can go to that binder and know exactly how things should happen and not be guessing or making mistakes or creating risk. So when we do that, I just want to mention that sometimes we hear people saying that, oh, that's, that's the white man's way of doing things, or that's not the way that we do it. But what we find is that when we go into community, we speak to elders and we speak to those knowledge keepers, and they had just as rigorous rules for every single aspect because they're important. We didn't write them down, but in the absence and loss of our traditional knowledge and our customary ways of bringing those laws into our community through our big houses or our gatherings, we have lost many of those things. But when we sit down and talk about all of these with elders, with knowledge keepers, they usually will say, oh yeah, we used to have to do this, we used to have to do that. And really quickly you find out if you've done something wrong. But what we can do now is write these things down, incorporate them into our policies, and create that legacy for future generations to build on. And when we take a look at the framework we're going to share with you, it includes a whole number of pieces that we've developed over the years that includes everything a leader could and should impact at the board level. So a shareholder will say, make sure you have comprehensive governance policies, and this is what the board should be creating. A comprehensive set of policies that takes a look at how they do the work of the board. Meeting and agenda settings, conflict of interest, code of conduct, all of those different component parts. The next piece is around how the board directs senior management to ensure effective operations. So again, there's a whole suite of policies around what could and should happen in terms of defining what should happen at the operational level. When we take a look at the next piece, it's around, and we talk about 4 quadrants. So it is very much a holistic approach in that way too. The next piece is around relationship between the board, shareholders, and citizens. How is that relationship developed? How do we input needs and interests and support understanding of skills and competencies to build opportunities, and then to share those opportunities and report back to members and shareholders on what's been realized on a regular basis. So that's what we include in this piece. The final piece that we include that we don't ever see other corporate governance consultants ever do is strategic planning and reporting. And so that really specifically gets into mirroring and complementing CCP methods, which before CCP was, the term was used, it's just good community planning. So we use those same community planning methods in community economic development plans. Again, engaging members on a one-to-one basis or on a small group basis, depending on, guided by committee, to be able to identify their needs and interests, have conversations and inform them around what different industry trends are and what their needs and interests are, to reflect and incorporate that into a strategic plan and annual business plan.
Part of that engagement and connection with your development corporation, with your community, is the use of community advisories. As a community-owned development corporation, community advisory committee is an excellent method to build capacity and support small business development and economic diversification. It's important to note that small business development drives about 98% of provincial and federal economies. However, our nations represent a very small fraction of that, from 2 to 15% of small business operations inside the community. A community advisory terms of reference is recommended, set by the shareholders and supported by the board, and should include a standard of code of conduct and conflict of interest standards, as well as clearly stating the purpose, it's not a decision-making body, and what resources are available for them to do their business, and then have some reporting requirements in their terms of reference to bring back their voice back to the board.
So I just want to go into the purpose a little bit more. Mark did a great job of summarizing this, but the purpose of an advisory committee could and should be to build awareness and engaged planning. So for a community to make informed decisions, if we're going to get into the tourism industry, how is it looking? Do we even want to get involved in it? So when we do our community economic development planning with communities, we do all our research on the various industries that are available, as rising opportunities for them as those that are currently involved, and to say, you may have been involved in the forestry industry, but we're starting to see a collapse of that. So you need to diversify your economy away from resources, and you have these other opportunities. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And then we have members start to say, well, I've always wanted to get into tourism, and this can happen, that can happen. We always needed a corner grocery store, and we need this, we need that. Suddenly you now start to see these opportunities arising. When you overlay that with existing information for demographics in the regional area, industry trends, you now have an informed and knowledge-based decision of and voice of community that they can now participate. So now they know, well, they're getting into this trucking industry because we've had this opportunity for a while. We've got this great contract at the nation level, but maybe I might want to get my ticket and start operating my own trucking business and then subcontract to them. They start to now see opportunities in that emerging economy that they wouldn't have otherwise if you hadn't talked to them. So really important to build the capacity of members to participate meaningfully in economic development.
And then ideally, it's agreements. Additional agreements that are typically made for regarding loans and reinvestments. DevCores can often be started from the nation's own trusts. And therefore, how to pay back those loans is important and should be part of the establishment of your DevCore. It should not be the cost of sustaining the DevCore, but intended to support the repayment terms and conditions. Without such an agreement, many communities then ultimately come to resent the development corporation. And then reinvestment agreements that support how and when the DevCore will then provide payments to the nation, and the nation will control to supplement an ongoing program and service delivery, more education, more training, defining how is not for the DevCore to define, but rather for the shareholders to define how that gets spread around. Finally, it's important to wear the right hat, and you're a leader as a council member and also as a shareholder, and clear on what function you're serving when you're making decisions. And you can have two decisions, but when you're asked for your shareholder decision, you must give that version of who you are, because you're now wearing the shareholder hat. So it's important to make sure your voice is known for where you belong in that package.
And one final word on that is we talk about power and authority and the ability, but when we reframe it to responsibility, it's really easy to come back to the base of where we need to operate from. So if I'm a director and I see an issue going on in the development corporation, I have to think, what is my responsibility in this? I can't go in and direct staff immediately. I need to report this, thinking about how I report it, even based on our policies and our plans, to say, I'm concerned about this because it doesn't align with our policies or it doesn't align with our plans. Can you look into it further and advise and provide a briefing on the functioning of that issue or the understanding of that issue? So it's really important to think about what is your responsibility in this, because it's really easy to just take over and do whatever you think needs to happen and undermine your staff, undermine their authority, and then you lose morale. You can scare people away. So it's really important in good governance to know your responsibility area and stay in your wheelhouse or stay in your area of responsibility and use that pre-planned information to be able to move forward in a good way. So in addition to all the agreements we talked about and everything we talked about in this workshop today, that a shareholder and leaders in establishing or re-establishing a development corporation should undertake planning on. Again, this is something that usually takes a day or two of sitting down and having that conversation, structured material so you can document and have agreement on everything. A lot of tools that we can share if anyone's wanting to do this, and the methods by which we've done it in the past. But we have some time now for closing comments, questions and answers. We want to be able to see if there's anything that we can help support in terms of your nation's rebuilding, for questions and answers or sharing of your experience.
Thank you. And we'll wait for your reply.
Thank you. When you were talking about the governance model, governance policies model, it brought back I was thinking about our Sundance ceremony. And last year, it was my first experience going to the lodge, and how there were rigorous rules. There was structure. There were people of their own expertise leading the way. And so how important it is. So we would use that in our ceremonies. So of course that would translate into, governance, into community, into leadership. And so just for you saying that, you made a really, really strong connection for me. So thank you for that knowledge that you've imparted. And then I also thought about, I wrote it down there. I heard this quote a couple of years ago, and it says there's an overrepresentation of Western values, beliefs, and worldviews on indigenous peoples. And I really believe what you're capturing here, what you're trying to say, is we're returning to our ways and to who we are, and we're relooking and we're rebirthing our value systems. And the whole language piece, I think, is so key to what you're talking about. So I was thinking about our mayor here in Amiskwitchi, Waskaigan, Edmonton, and I had gone to an event with him, and you know, we're a strong Cree community with other nations, but he started to speak to me in Cree, and I had no idea what he was talking about. But that was just, in that moment, I just felt so honored, and I felt so validated that he was attempting to speak my language. So, you know, language goes so far, and it's so important for our people just to hear our language again, and to learn it and to speak it. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank
Just
you,
on
Ashka.
that, I wanted to share one of the tools that we've done. And so I really appreciate you sharing that, your understanding of how that applied in that, in the dance that you had. And what we've had is this wonderful experience. And I'm going to share this one because it's so important to understand how we all have a piece of that puzzle that reflects our customary laws and traditions, and that's reflected in our language. And we had the honor of working with one elder as a head of family here. And I remember her coming to us, and when we started talking about customary laws and traditions and protocols, she was overwhelmed and started to cry because she said she has none of that knowledge because of colonial, from residential schools, colonial systems, that she wasn't an elder, that she really didn't have that knowledge, and she felt so bad because she didn't have it, and it affected her identity. And we started talking, and just really gently said, you know, so what do you remember? What do you have? And she started telling her stories about her grandfather and her grandparents, and all of that beautiful knowledge was embedded in there. And we started saying, so you used to do this? Yes, that's your customary laws and traditions. That's your governing system. That is your values. That is everything that we're looking for. You had it all. It's in there. And every single one of you have those pieces. And when we come together and circle and talk about that, we can bring it back and trust yourself that it's in there. And so when we did, by the end of a couple of years of working with her and other community members, she actually proudly stepped aside from the heads of family and said she was taking her role on the Elders Council, and she was having her grandson step in as the head of family, and he brought his 4-year-old daughter, and they sat in the planning sessions with us. And she, again, she cried. She was very emotional, and she proudly wore the scarf that we gave her as a head of family. But she went from feeling that she had no knowledge, that all this beautiful knowledge was lost, that it was all in her. And at the end of the day, she proudly took her place.
Such a good story. Miyasan, it's good. It's really good. Thank you so much, Laara and Mark, for your presentation this afternoon. I'm always inspired. I'm always challenged to want to dig a little deeper, to read a little bit more, to research, to educate myself. So thank you for, you know, planting seeds and lending us your knowledge. So we give you thanks. As we end our session today, you know, we have this great opportunity. Yes, we're in the midst of this pandemic with COVID-19. It's affected us all. It's caused us to dig a little deeper and to do things a little bit different. So we're so grateful that we have this opportunity still to be able to connect via the interweb online. We still have this ability to listen and to learn from one another. So as we're in our own home fires, you know, think about the blessings that are all around you in so many ways, that you have air in your lungs, breath in your lungs, you have water to drink, you have loved ones close by. Sometimes they're our family, and then sometimes they're our chosen family. So remember the blessings that Creator has given to you as you go along the rest of your day. May you walk in balance and harmony with the land, with yourself, with Creator, and with the circle. And Laara and Mike, I know you are busy. You're off to your next consultation, if you will, community. May Creator grant you wisdom and knowledge, and that you shine in your expertise. Hi, hi.
Thank you. Be safe.
Peace, everyone.